Well, folks, we had to come on and do a show after the news that broke earlier today. We're not going to focus on really anything that went on in the last two games of the White Sox series against the Astros because that is not why we are doing a show here on a Friday evening. I would have gotten to this earlier in the day, but I was not able to get to it earlier in the day. The White Sox have dealt Andrew Vaughn to the Milwaukee Brewers in exchange for Aaron Civale and cash considerations. Welcome to this edition of Believe in White Sox here on the Believe Podcast Network as we are recording on a Friday night before the White Sox start the first of their three-game series against the Texas Rangers down in Arlington. Remember to like, remember to subscribe, remember to tell your friends, remember to tell your friends' friends, remember to tell your friends' dogs who might bark it to the neighborhood about what we're doing here on Believe in White Sox. We are trying to crank out more content and be as positive as we can about the state of the Chicago White Sox, which I am positive about the news that came earlier today. Surprised, but I think that given where Andrew Vaughn was at this point in his career, at first I was surprised by the move, not the fact that they traded him, but based on who they got back. And I'll explain in just a moment because I think it was pretty clear that when the White Sox decided to call up a first baseman again, that when they made the decision to call Tim Elko back up instead of Andrew Vaughn, it was pretty clear that at some point or another, the White Sox were going to try to trade Andrew Vaughn. And Andrew Vaughn was not having a great go down in AAA. He was obviously performing better than he was at the big league level, but for somebody that had basically 5 full years, if you include this year of major league experience, it was time for a fresh start for Andrew Vaughn. And he was hitting 211 in 15 games at AAA Charlotte, on base at 328. So at least he was getting on base a little bit. 2 homers, 11 runs driven in. At the big league level this year, in 48 games with the White Sox, 189 average, 5 homers, 19 driven in, on base of just 218, and a slugging of just 314. By far his worst major league season of the 5 that he was in the bigs for the White Sox. And I feel like there's a part of me that knew that this era was going to come to an end, knew that it had to come to an end, but sad at the same time that it did. Because I will say, and again, this is the Northern California bias, and I actually have Vaughn's alma mater here, the California Golden Bears. I was going to wear the hat, but on the video, it looked like it was going to cover up the shadows or give me some shadows over my face, which didn't necessarily feel like was the best route for the content of the pod today. And this is not going to be a long episode, I'll tell you that. So there was a part of me that loved the Andrew Vaughn pick because it signaled to me a clear succession at first base. And the White Sox, over the past 30 years, you can say, have had a successful run at first base more than probably any other position on their team. Frank Thomas from 1990 until he transitioned in being a DH. Paul Konerko slides in, is probably the franchise's best first baseman, considering the Big Hurt probably spent more time at DH in the latter part of his career than he did at first base. Then from Konerko to Jose Abreu, and then Jose Abreu, you figured, given his age, given he was an old rookie, came from Cuba, that it was going to transition well for Vaughn to eventually take over first base. Remember, Vaughn, when he first came up, they had him play the outfield, which he had not played much outfield in his life, but it was a way for them to get his bat in the lineup and on the roster. And a lot of White Sox fans, a lot of people criticize that decision because they say it may have messed with his development. But I think Andrew Vaughn, unfortunately, was in a somewhat of a no-win situation in terms of his development. Now, the White Sox could have held him down there a little bit longer, but Andrew Vaughn played half a minor league season. Andrew Vaughn was drafted in 2019. He played the 2019 minor league season, grand total of, if I'm looking at this correctly, and I believe I am, played a grand total of, do math in your head, Greg, 54 minor league games before he made his big league debut. There were no minor leagues in 2020 because of the COVID shutdown. So Andrew Vaughn plays 54 minor league games, none above high A. and is on the opening day roster in 2021. Has a solid enough rookie year. 235 average, 309 on base, 15 homers, 48 RBI in 127 games. A good start for a rookie. Then the next year, 271 average, homers increase to 17, RBI increases to 76. Then in 2023, when he takes over as the primary first baseman, 152 games, 258, 21 homers, 80 runs driven in. And then last year, average falls to 246, on base at just 297, 19 homers, 70 runs driven in. Solid enough power numbers for a guy on a really bad team. And then this year, it all fell apart on him. He never got going. He never looked good. And a lot of people criticize his hustle. They criticize his work ethic, the fact his development plateaued. It was just time for a change of scenery. And while some of the numbers that I read off were okay, those would be numbers that you'd expect from a fill-in guy or a journeyman that you sign off to a one-year deal to fill a position. Those aren't the numbers of a former Golden Spikes Award winner and a third overall pick. That's not what you want from what you expected out of him. I hope the Brewers find a way to fix him. And given the fact that Rhys Hoskins is under contract for another year after this year, at least I believe he is, Andrew Vaughn is going into his final year of arbitration next year. He's making $5.8 million this year and more than likely will make way less than that next year. We'll see if the Brewers, in order to get his bat in the lineup, put him back in the outfield. Or if they put him at first base and they want Rhys Hoskins to DH and they can continue to play Christian Yelich more in the outfield. I mean, I used to be really in tune with what the Brewers did because I at one time worked for a Milwaukee Brewer affiliate, but that isn't the case anymore. And I think the return is interesting in a twofold way because it's a temporary return. Aaron Civale is on a one-year deal. His contract expires at the end of this year. Aaron Civale is 30 years old, and he is not a part of the White Sox competitive future. But why do you get somebody like Aaron Civale? You get somebody like Aaron Civale because of the fact that he was griping about being moved to the bullpen in Milwaukee. Now, last year with the Brewers, he had probably the best year that he had had in quite some time. He, in 2024, with the Brewers after being acquired from the Rays. So this is just with Milwaukee alone. He made 31 total starts last year, 4.36 ERA over 161 innings. With Milwaukee, in 14 starts, he had a 3.53 ERA in 74 innings. And to start this year, he wasn't great. 5 starts, 4.91 ERA. And he was griping about going to the bullpen, and his manager, Pat Murphy, said that he's got to be professional and do it. Well, he got traded. He was asking for a trade because of the fact that he didn't want to get shifted to the bullpen with the Brewers bringing up a rookie. So what Aaron Civale now has a chance to do is do two things. And this is with the White Sox. This is the intent of picking somebody like him up. You get somebody that can eat innings so that you don't have to continue to rely on bullpen games. You now have, because Jonathan Cannon is still hurt, you've got 2 veteran big league arms, both of them former Milwaukee Brewers, not at the same time, in Adrian Hauser and Aaron Civale, who can take up 2/5 of your rotation to go along with Sean Burke, Shane Smith, and Davis Martin. When Jonathan Cannon comes back, we'll see how that shifts around a little bit. But the White Sox can, quote unquote, be careful with how they operate. And I think that the intent of him being here is to eat innings, which he'll do. And unlike the Brewers, who are still under a pressure to win now, even though they are not the same team that they've been the past couple of years, Civale has a chance to play himself back onto a contending team. If he's good over these next 7 weeks, and it's June 13th, let's say in theory he gets 5 to 6 starts in a White Sox uniform. That's at the baseline. Maybe it ends up being 7. If he's good in his time on the South Side, you best believe that a veteran, he's 30, on an expiring contract that is only $8 million. He's an unrestricted free agent after this year. You best believe that you would pick up a veteran right-handed starting pitcher for the cost of, estimate the last 2 months of the season, probably about $2.5 million. You will give up an asset for that. And that's what the White Sox are hoping. They're hoping to flip probably both Aaron Civale and Adrian Hauser in order to get assets back. That's why they signed Hauser, to eat innings and hopefully be good enough to flip for assets. So far, his performance has been better than expected. And hopefully you can say the same thing for Aaron Civale when he finally takes the bump for Chicago. What kind of return you get back, who knows? But the White Sox can hold these 2 tickets out there and tell contending teams, hey, you want this guy? It's going to cost this much. And if you tell team A it's going to cost A, you can tell team B it costs B. And if you then tell team A that team B is willing to pay B, then maybe team A is willing to raise their price to here. And you can just continue to bid these teams off of each other until you get the best deal. And the more assets that you appreciate, the better your team is going to be moving forward. There is no future in either of these 2 guys in this organization. Their purpose is to eat innings for a rotation that has lost 1 guy to the year due to injury, in Martin Perez, who, if Martin Perez had been healthy and had not undergone Tommy John surgery, there's a good chance that he would have been dealt by the deadline anyway, because he serves the same type of role that an Adrian Hauser and Aaron Civale would serve. You get rid of somebody that had no trade value to begin with and somehow find trade value. And that's only because, in my opinion, the only reason you were able to get somebody like an Aaron Civale is because of the fact that he made such a big stink about being moved to the bullpen. It was almost as if the Brewers would say, we'll get rid of him by any means possible. And they might see Andrew Vaughn as a reclamation project and somebody that, with a year and a half of team control left, they can turn into something. The Brewers and the Rays, probably as good as any organizations in baseball, can turn water into wine. And they also know when to dump guys at the right time. So I think that the Brewers feel like, having seen enough of Andrew Vaughn, having played interleague against the White Sox every year, and having seen what he can do when he is playing well, they might feel like we can get him back to being what people thought he would be when he was drafted 3rd overall. And for Aaron Civale, he's on a prove-it deal to be able to get traded to a contender. Now there's some motivation in his fire. Okay, you're on a team that they're probably not going to win the division. They're 5.5 back of the Cubs, but the Cubs are clearly the best team in that division this year. And I hate to say that because I hate the Cubs, but they are. It's unfortunate, but they are. And so the way that you have to look at it is, he just got traded from a team that could be in the playoffs to one of the worst teams in the American League. How do you get back on a team that's going to be back in the playoffs? I mean, all Aaron Civale has known his entire career has been the playoffs. He came up in the Guardians organization. Then he was with the Rays. Then he was with the Brewers. All he knows is going to the playoffs. So how is he going to get himself back into a playoff team? And what team is going to need starting pitching come the end of July? And that's the thing. If you're the White Sox, with both him and Adrian Hauser, you cannot trade them too early unless a team gives you something that will blow you away. If they give you a top 5 prospect in the organization, you ship that guy out as soon as humanly possible. The one thing that Chris Getz, I don't think, can do, like what he did with the Eric Fetty and Michael Kopech deal. He can't trade the guys in the same trade. Although, no, wait a minute. I don't know. I can't remember it correctly because it was a three-way deal with the Cardinals, and Pham and Fetty went to the Cardinals. Kopech went to the Dodgers. Don't trade them in the same deal. Trade them in separate deals. If both of them are still on the team come August, then it is either A, failure of Chris Getz to be able to find the right trade partner, or B, a failure of those two guys to be able to warrant themselves as a starter that can help get a team over the hump. And there are going to be some teams, there will be some teams that are going to be desperate in order to make the playoffs after having less than successful years last year. I'll give you a couple of examples. Corbin Burns is out for the year for the Arizona Diamondbacks. The Diamondbacks are 4.5 out of a wild card. If the Diamondbacks are still, relatively speaking, in it, you better believe they're going to try and get another starting pitcher because they need to. The St. Louis Cardinals are losers of 5 straight after having a very solid start to the year. You better believe that they feel like they need another starting pitcher. Somehow, some way, the Angels are only 2.5 out of a wild card. You best believe that they might need another starting pitcher. There's a lot of teams that need another starting pitcher. Minnesota is currently in one of the 3 wild card slots, and they've basically lost Pablo Lopez for 3 months. Now, do you want to trade within the division? No. But it might be unavoidable. And if you get back a prospect, an asset that you like, who cares? It's not like you're giving them a competitive advantage for years to come. You're giving them a competitive advantage for 2 months in a year where you're going to come nowhere close to making the playoffs. Hold your cards tight and hope that Adrian Hauser and Aaron Civale give you chances to win games. Hauser has, and I believe Civale will as well. One final note, and we will keep it pretty brief before we say goodbye, and that is Brooks Baldwin's back on the roster. He was recalled from AAA Charlotte, and thank goodness Joshua Palacios was finally designated for assignment. Good soldier Joshua Palacios. He was on this team way too long, and now you get another one of the kids that hopefully is going to have a chance to play every single day. I want to see Brooks Baldwin, though, primarily in the outfield. This team, it feels like, has got a set plan for what they want to do in the infield, and if Baldwin has to play the infield, fine. But I think you need to be able to see him in some outfield position at all times in order to potentially prove whether or not he can be a future piece in the outfield, which I think he can. He's shown the ability to be able to play the outfield effectively at times. The question, though, then becomes, will he be able to outplay whoever becomes an everyday outfielder in the future? If he's a 4th outfielder or somebody like a super utility guy, the new Leori Garcia, I think that's fine. He's got more positional versatility than Joshua Palacios, and he has more of a future because of the fact that this is only his 2nd year in the bigs, and he's a young guy. And I think the White Sox were a little bit trigger happy sending him back down because he wasn't great at the big league level this year compared to what he was last year, but he still was effective at times, more effective than, say, the Andrew Vaughns of the world. Brooks Baldwin hit .215 in 44 games at the bigs. Better than Andrew Vaughn. It's better than Luis Robert. I know a lot of people say that batting average is BS. I still say that batting average is significant. And in 19 games with Charlotte, he hit .380 with a .437 on base. That is not nothing, folks. That is something. And it is something significant. So anyway, that is it. That is all on this edition of Believe in White Sox. Sox, 3 games against the Texas Rangers, then an off day on Monday, and then a quick 3-game home set against the St. Louis Cardinals, then off to Toronto for 3, and then it will be a 3-game homestand to wrap up June, a National League slate for the White Sox, as after the Rangers series, 3 of their next 4 will be against teams from the National League. Diamondbacks will be coming in on June 23rd, 3-game set there, off day on the 26th, and then the San Francisco Giants will be in for 3 at the end of June. Thanks everybody for listening to this edition of Believe in White Sox. Fare thee well, Andrew Vaughn. Seems like we hardly knew you.